The dust choked her screams, but nothing could silence a mother's terror. "Please, please don't take my child." Lydia Harrow's knees slammed into the dirt as rough hands tore 4-year-old Annie from her arms. The little girl's wails pierced the 1887 Wyoming marketplace like shattered glass. Around them, the crowd of Dustridge stood frozen witnesses to cruelty they dared not challenge. Barrett Clay, the town's ruthless landlord, smiled as his men bound Lydia's wrists. "The child's collateral now. You don't pay, I collect." Then a single word cut through the chaos. "Stop!" Every head turned. The silent rancher everyone whispered about stood there, his shadow stretching long across the dust. Without another word, Caleb Rowan threw a leather pouch at Clay's feet. Gold coins spilled into the dirt. What happened next would change 3 lives forever. Before we begin, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. This story goes places you won't expect. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's dive in. The morning had started with hope, which made the cruelty worse. Lydia had woken before dawn, her back aching from the thin mattress in the boarding house room she could barely afford. Annie slept curled beside her tiny fingers, clutching the edge of Lydia's worn shawl. For a moment, just one quiet moment, Lydia had let herself believe things might get better. She'd been wrong. By 9 o'clock, she stood in the Dustridge marketplace with her washing basket trying to find work. Any work. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her spine as she approached one household after another. "Mrs. Patterson, I can have your linens cleaned by tomorrow." "We've got someone, Lydia." "Mr. Simmons, I'll work for half rate." "Can't help you." Door after door, rejection after rejection. And all the while, Annie clung to her skirts silent and wide-eyed, sensing her mother's desperation, even if she couldn't name it. Lydia had been a widow for 8 months. 8 months since the mine collapse took Thomas. 8 months of watching their savings drain away like water through cupped hands. 8 months of falling further and further behind on the rent Barrett Clay demanded, with increasing venom. She'd paid what she could. It was never enough. "Mama, I'm thirsty." Lydia looked down at her daughter's upturned face and felt her heart crack. She had 3 cents in her pocket. 3 cents between them and starvation. "Soon, sweetheart, soon." That's when she saw the crowd forming near the general store. People were gathering, muttering, pointing. Lydia's stomach clenched. In towns like Dustridge, crowds meant trouble. She should have turned away, should have kept walking. But something pulled her forward. Maybe it was the desperate hope that where there were people, there might be opportunity. Maybe it was just exhaustion making her stupid. She pushed through the outer ring of onlookers, Annie's hand tight in hers. That's when she heard her name. Lydia Harrow. Barrett Clay stood on the general store steps like a king on a throne. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with slicked-back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. Behind him stood 2 of his men, brothers named Pike and Vernon, both built like bulls and twice as mean. Lydia's blood turned to ice. "Lydia Harrow." Barrett called again, his voice carrying across the square. "Step forward." She couldn't move. Her feet had grown roots. Barrett descended the steps slowly, deliberately. The crowd parted for him. They always did. "You've been avoiding me, Lydia." I paid you last week, $17. "You owe 63. Barrett stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "You're 5 weeks behind. The agreement was clear." "Please, Mr. Clay, I just need more time. I'm looking for work." "I'm trying." "Trying isn't paying." Barrett's eyes flicked down to Annie, and Lydia instinctively pulled her daughter closer. "You signed a contract when you took that room. You put up collateral." The world tilted. "What collateral? I didn't. I never—" Barrett pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket and shook it open. "Right here, Clause 7. In the event of default, the landlord may seize assets equivalent to the debt owed." He looked at Annie again, and this time his smile widened. "You don't have assets, Lydia, but you have her. No. The word came out as a whisper. Then louder. No. You can't, that's not legal. You can't take my child. It's right here in writing. Your signature, your terms. Barrett folded the paper and tucked it away. Pike, Vernon, collect the collateral. Everything happened too fast. The two men moved forward, and Lydia stumbled backward, clutching Annie against her chest. Annie started to cry, confused and frightened, and the sound of her daughter's fear ignited something primal in Lydia's chest. Stay away from her. Mama. Pike grabbed Lydia's arm and twisted it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder, white-hot and blinding. Vernon reached for Annie, and Lydia screamed a raw animal sound that should have stopped hearts. No! Please! Please don't take my child! Annie shrieked as Vernon's massive hands closed around her small body and pulled. Lydia fought with everything she had, kicking, thrashing, her fingers hooked into claws, but Pike forced her down. Her knees slammed into the hard-packed dirt, and dust filled her mouth and nose. Annie. Mama. The little girl's arms stretched toward her mother, fingers grasping at empty air. Lydia lunged forward, but Pike yanked her back hard enough to slam her face first into the ground. Blood burst from her split lip, coppery and warm. Around them, the crowd watched. They just watched. Lydia twisted her head, spitting dirt and blood, and looked at them. Her neighbors' people. She'd washed clothes for people she'd smiled at in church. They stood there with their eyes downcast, their faces carefully blank. Cowards, all of them. Please, Lydia sobbed, her voice breaking. Someone help me. Please, she's just a baby. Barrett crouched beside her, his polished boots inches from her face. You should have paid your rent, Lydia. This is what happens when you don't pay what you owe. I'll get the money. I swear to God, I'll get it. Just don't take her. Too late. Barrett stood and brushed dust from his knees. Vernon, secure the child. We'll auction her contract to a household that can afford to feed her. Might do her some good, actually. Better than starving with a useless mother. Annie was screaming now, high and desperate, fighting against Vernon's grip with all the strength in her tiny body. Lydia could see her daughter's face, red, tear-streaked, terrified, and something inside her shattered so completely she knew she'd never be whole again. She tried to stand, but Pike kicked her shoulder and sent her sprawling again. The world spun. Dust and sky and faces all blurred together. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Stop! The word cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. Everything froze. The voice had come from somewhere behind the crowd, low, quiet, but with a weight that made people turn. Lydia lifted her head, blinking through tears and dust. A man stood at the edge of the marketplace. He was tall, but not massive, lean in the way of men who worked with their hands from dawn to dusk. He wore dusty work clothes, simple canvas pants, a faded shirt, a hat pulled low over his face. His jaw was rough with several days' worth of beard, and his eyes, dark and unreadable, were fixed on Barrett Clay with an intensity that made the air feel electric. Lydia had seen him before. Everyone in Dustridge had. He came into town once a month for supplies paid in cash and spoke to no one. They called him the Silent Rancher, though Lydia had heard his name exactly once, Caleb Rowan. He took a step forward. The crowd parted. Barrett straightened, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation. This doesn't concern you, Rowan. Caleb said nothing. He just kept walking, his boots clicking against the hard ground with steady, unhurried rhythm. He moved like a man who'd decided something and wouldn't be swayed. I said this doesn't concern you. Barrett's voice rose sharp with authority. Go back to your ranch and mind your own business. Caleb stopped 10 feet away. His eyes moved from Barrett to Vernon, who still held Annie. The little girl had gone quiet, staring at this stranger with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Then Caleb looked at Lydia. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Something Lydia couldn't name, but felt in her bones. Recognition, maybe. Or understanding. the look of one broken person seeing another. Caleb reached into his pocket. Barrett tensed. "What are you?" Caleb pulled out a small leather pouch and threw it. It hit the ground between them with a heavy thunk, and gold coins spilled out across the dirt. They glinted in the harsh sunlight, beautiful and impossible. The crowd gasped. Barrett stared at the coins, then at Caleb. "What is this?" "Her debt." Caleb's voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "Paid in full." "You what? You can't just—" "I can." Caleb's gaze never wavered. "Count it. $63. Release them." Barrett's face went through several expressions at once, shock-anger calculation. Pike and Vernon looked at their boss waiting for orders. The whole square seemed to hold its breath. Lydia couldn't process what was happening. This man, this stranger, had just paid her debt. Why would anyone do that? Barrett bent and scooped up the coins with quick, greedy fingers. He counted them twice, his lips moving silently. When he finished, his jaw tightened. "This clears her debt," he said slowly. "But it doesn't. It clears her debt," Caleb repeated. There was no room for argument in his tone. "Vernon, give her the child." Vernon looked at Barrett. Barrett's face flushed red, his pride clearly wrestling with his greed. The gold in his hands won. "Fine." He nodded sharply. "Vernon." Vernon hesitated, then carried Annie toward Lydia. Pike released his grip on Lydia's arms, and she scrambled forward on her hands and knees, reaching desperately for her daughter. "Mama!" Annie tumbled into Lydia's arms, and Lydia clutched her so tightly the child squeaked in protest. Lydia buried her face in Annie's hair, breathing in the scent of her, feeling her warmth and solidity and aliveness. She was shaking so hard she thought she might fly apart. "Thank you," she whispered into Annie's curls. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." But when she looked up, Caleb was already walking away. "Wait." Lydia tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She fell back to her knees, still holding Annie. "Wait, please." Caleb stopped, but didn't turn around. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how to repay." "You don't." His voice was quiet but clear. "Just keep her safe." He started walking again. Lydia watched him go, this silent stranger who'd saved her child without explanation or expectation. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their business now that the show was over. Barrett stuffed the coins into his pocket and stalked away with his men throwing dark looks over his shoulder. And Lydia sat in the dust, holding her daughter, wondering who Caleb Rowan really was. The boarding house room felt smaller than ever that night. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed, Annie asleep beside her, and tried to make sense of the day. Her hands still trembled when she thought about it, the weight of Vernon's grip, the sound of Annie's screams, the certainty that she was about to lose everything that mattered. And then Caleb Rowan. She'd asked everyone she could find about him. The answers were frustratingly vague. Keeps to himself. Lost his wife years back. Hasn't spoken more than 10 words to anyone since. Got a ranch up in the hills. Does well enough, I suppose. No one knew why he'd helped her. No one could explain it. Lydia stared at the wall at the water stain that looked like a bird in flight and felt the crushing weight of debt settle over her shoulders. She didn't owe Barrett anymore, but now she owed Caleb Rowan $63, a sum that might as well be $6,000 for all her ability to repay it. She'd have to find him, thank him properly, figure out some kind of payment plan, though. God knew what she could offer. But tomorrow, tonight, she just needed to hold her daughter and breathe. Annie stirred in her sleep, making the small whimpering sounds that meant nightmares. Lydia stroked her hair gently, humming a tuneless melody until the child settled again. "We're safe," Lydia whispered. "We're safe, baby girl." She almost believed it. 3 days later, Lydia stood at the edge of Caleb Rowan's property with Annie's hand in hers and her heart hammering against her ribs. The ranch sat in a valley between rolling hills, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through scrub brush and scattered cottonwoods. The house itself was modest, a single-story structure, with a covered porch, weathered siding, and a stone chimney. Behind it stood a barn, a chicken coop, and several corrals, where horses grazed in the late afternoon sun. It looked lonely. Lydia had walked for 3 hours to get here carrying Annie when the child's legs gave out. They'd asked directions at the general store, where the clerk had given her a strange look, but drawn a rough map on brown paper. "You sure you want to go out there?" he'd asked. "Rowan doesn't take kindly to visitors." "I have to thank him. Could just leave well enough alone." But Lydia couldn't. The debt, financial and moral, weighed on her like stones. She squared her shoulders and walked up the dirt path toward the house. Before she reached the porch, the front door opened. Caleb stood in the doorway, backlit by the dim interior. He'd cleaned up since the marketplace, shaved, changed into fresh clothes, but his expression was just as unreadable as before. They stared at each other for a long moment. "Mr. Rowan," Lydia finally said, "I'm sorry to bother you. I needed to thank you for what you did." Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No need." "There's every need. You saved my daughter. You saved us both." Lydia's voice cracked despite her best efforts. "I don't have the money to repay you yet, but I will. I swear I will. I'll work. I'll do whatever it takes." "No debt." Lydia blinked. "What? You don't owe me anything." Caleb shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Go home, Mrs. Harrow." "I can't just. You gave up $63 for strangers. That's not nothing." "It's done." His tone was final. "You should go." But Lydia didn't move. She couldn't, because the truth was, she had nowhere else to go. Barrett had evicted her from the boarding house the day after the marketplace incident, revenge for his public humiliation. She'd spent the last 2 nights sleeping in the livery stable, hiding from the owner, praying no one would notice them. She was out of options. "Mr. Rowan," she said quietly, "I need work. Any work. I can clean, cook, mend clothes, tend animals, whatever you need. I won't ask for much, just enough to keep us fed, and maybe earn back what you paid." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You walked 3 hours to ask me for a job." "I walked 3 hours because you're the only person in this godforsaken territory who showed me a shred of human decency." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with all the fear and exhaustion she'd been holding inside. Annie pressed closer to her leg, sensing the tension. Caleb looked at Annie, then back at Lydia. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse, shut the door and leave them standing there in the dust. Instead, he stepped back. "Come inside." The interior of the house matched its exterior, simple, functional, almost austere. A main room held a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, and not much else. Doorways led to what Lydia assumed were a bedroom and maybe a storage room. Everything was clean, but worn, like a place that was maintained out of necessity rather than love. Caleb gestured to the table. "Sit." Lydia guided Annie into one of the chairs and remained standing. Caleb moved to the stove and poured water from a kettle into 2 tin cups. He set one in front of Annie, who grabbed it with both hands and drank greedily. He offered the other to Lydia. She took it, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you." Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed. He still hadn't said more than a few words at a time, and Lydia was starting to understand why people called him silent. "I don't need help," he said finally. Lydia's heart sank. "Oh, but you need a place to stay." She froze. "How did you walked 3 hours with a child. Your dress is covered in hay. You're desperate." Caleb's gaze was steady, not unkind. "Where have you been sleeping?" Lydia's cheeks burned. She wanted to lie to preserve some shred of dignity, but what was the point? The livery stable. Something dark crossed Caleb's face. He looked at Annie, who'd finished her water and was now slumped against the table, exhausted. "Room's in the back," he said. "Used to be my wife's. No one's touched it since she passed. You can have it. Lydia's breath caught. Mr. Rowan, I can't just... You want to work fine. You cook clean, mend what needs mending. I pay room and board. No wages. That's too generous. It's practical. Caleb pushed off the counter and moved toward the door. I'm not home most days. Ranch doesn't run itself. Having someone here who can keep things in order makes sense. He was lying. Lydia could hear it in the careful way he chose his words. He didn't need help. He'd been managing alone just fine. But he was offering anyway, out of pity or guilt or something else she couldn't name. Pride told her to refuse. Survival told her to accept. 3 months, she heard herself say. Give me 3 months, and I'll earn back what you paid. After that, if you still want us to stay, we can discuss wages. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then finally, he nodded. 3 months. He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, leaving Lydia and Annie alone in the house. Lydia sank into the chair beside her daughter and let out a shaking breath. Annie looked up at her with drowsy eyes. Mama, are we staying here? Lydia pulled her daughter close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Yes, baby, we're staying. For now, at least. For now, they were safe. And that was more than she'd dared hope for in a very long time. The first night in Caleb Rowan's house, Lydia didn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed with Annie curled against her side, staring at the ceiling beams and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Wind rattled the windows. Something a horse maybe snorted in the darkness outside. And somewhere in the house, floorboards creaked as Caleb moved through rooms she couldn't see. The bedroom he'd given them was small but clean, a bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a wooden chair by the window. On the dresser sat a silver hairbrush tarnished with age and a small photograph in a frame, a young woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a bun. Caleb's wife. Lydia had stared at that photograph for a long time before blowing out the lamp. The woman looked happy, loved. The kind of person who'd never imagined dying young and leaving her husband alone in this quiet house. Lydia wondered what she'd think of 2 strangers sleeping in her bed. When dawn finally broke, Lydia eased out from under Annie's arm and dressed quickly in the dim light. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed a woman who looked older than her 26 years, hollowed out by grief and fear and too many nights without enough food. She splashed water on her face from the basin, pinched her cheeks to bring some color back, and stepped into the main room. Caleb was already gone. A note sat on the table, written in careful, blocky handwriting. Eggs in the coop, bread in the box, back by dark. Lydia read it twice, then folded it and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't know why she kept it. Maybe because it was proof that this was real, that someone had offered them shelter without demanding anything cruel in return. She found the chicken coop behind the barn. 6 hens scratched at the ground, clucking indignantly when she opened the gate. Lydia collected 4 eggs, warm and perfect, and carried them back to the house in her apron. She made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, thick slices of bread toasted over the stove, water boiled for weak tea. When Annie woke, rubbing sleep from her eyes, Lydia had a plate waiting. Is Mr. Quiet here? Annie asked, looking around the empty room. Lydia smiled despite herself. Mr. Quiet. He doesn't talk much. Annie picked up a piece of toast and bit into it. Like he's keeping secrets. Maybe he just doesn't have much to say. Everybody has something to say, Mama. He just doesn't want to. Out of the mouths of children. Lydia ruffled her daughter's hair and let the observation sit. After breakfast, she explored the house properly. It didn't take long. The main room. The bedroom they'd been given. Caleb's room door closed, and Lydia didn't dare open it. A small pantry stocked with basics, flour, salt beans, coffee sugar. And a back room that might have been a nursery once, judging by the cradle gathering dust in the corner. Lydia's chest tightened when she saw that cradle. So Caleb hadn't just lost a wife, he'd lost a child too. She backed out of the room and closed the door softly. The rest of the morning she cleaned. Not because the house was dirty, Caleb kept things tidy enough, but because she needed to do something with her hands. She swept the floors, wiped down the table, scrubbed the dishes until they gleamed. Annie played quietly in the corner with a corn husk doll Lydia had made her weeks ago, back when they still had a home. By noon, Lydia had worked up the courage to venture outside. The ranch sprawled across the valley in a way that suggested years of careful planning. The barn was old, but solid, its roof recently patched. The corrals were well-maintained posts, straight and wire-tight. 6 horses grazed in the larger pasture, working animals not fancy show horses, but healthy and well-fed. Lydia found Caleb near the northern fence line, replacing a broken post. He looked up when she approached, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the cool morning air, and his hands were wrapped in old leather gloves. "Didn't mean to interrupt," Lydia said. "I just wanted to ask what you'd like for supper." Caleb drove the post deeper into the ground with a heavy mallet. "Anything's fine." Anything isn't an answer. He paused mid-swing and looked at her. Really looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she was serious. "Stew," he said finally. "If there's meat." "There's salt pork in the pantry. I'll make it work." Caleb nodded and went back to his hammering. Lydia turned to leave, then stopped. "Mr. Rowan." He didn't look up. "Caleb." "What?" "Just Caleb." He repositioned the post and struck it again. "Mr. Rowan was my father." "All right, Caleb." The name felt strange in her mouth, too familiar for a man she barely knew. "Why did you help us? In town, I mean. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything." For a long moment, the only sound was the rhythmic thud of the mallet against wood. Lydia thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he lowered the tool and straightened, wiping his forearm across his forehead. Because no one else would. The simplicity of it hit her like a punch. No grand reason. No hidden agenda. Just a man who'd seen something wrong and chose to step in when everyone else looked away. "Thank you," Lydia said quietly. "I know I already said it, but thank you." Caleb picked up the mallet again. "Stew sounds good." It was a dismissal, gentle but clear. Lydia took it and headed back to the house, her mind churning with questions she didn't dare ask. That night, they ate together for the first time. Lydia set 3 bowls on the table, thick stew with carrots and potatoes, and chunks of salt pork that had simmered all afternoon until the meat fell apart. Fresh bread she'd baked in the old oven, its crust golden and crisp. Annie sat between them, swinging her legs and chattering about the chickens she'd chased that afternoon. "The red one's mean," Annie announced. "She pecked me." "Hens do that," Caleb said. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to Annie, and the child beamed like she'd won a prize. "What's her name?" "Doesn't have one." "Can I name her?" Caleb's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. He looked at Lydia, who shrugged slightly, then back at Annie. "If you want." "I'm going to call her Rosie, because she's red like a rose." Annie took a huge bite of bread and chewed thoughtfully. "Do you have a favorite chicken, Mr. Quiet?" Lydia nearly choked on her stew. "Annie." But Caleb's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Mr. Quiet. You don't talk much," Annie explained, completely unbothered by the nickname. "So you're Mr. Quiet." "Annie," Lydia said more firmly. "That's rude." "It's fine." Caleb set down his spoon and looked at the child. "No favorite chicken. They're all the same to me." "That's sad. Everybody should have a favorite something." "What's yours?" Annie considered this with the utmost seriousness. "My mama. She's my favorite everything." Lydia's throat closed. She reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand, unable to speak. Caleb watched them both, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he stood abruptly, picked up his bowl, and carried it to the wash basin. Good stew, he said without turning around. Thank you. He walked out the back door before Lydia could respond. The days fell into a pattern after that. Caleb rose before dawn and disappeared into the work of the ranch, mending fences, tending horses, clearing brush from the creek bed. He came back at dusk, usually filthy and exhausted, and ate whatever Lydia had prepared. Then he'd retreat to his room, or sit on the porch smoking a hand-rolled cigarette while staring at the darkening hills. He didn't talk much. But he was there, and slowly, without either of them planning it, the house began to change. Lydia repaired the torn curtains in the main room. She scoured years of grime from the windows until sunlight poured through. She organized the pantry, mended Caleb's shirts, and convinced him to let her trim his hair when it started falling into his eyes. "You look like a sheepdog," she'd said, wielding the scissors. "Sheepdogs are useful." "So are men who can see where they're going." He'd submitted to the haircut without further argument, sitting stiffly in the kitchen chair while she worked. His hair was thick and dark, shot through with premature gray at the temples. Lydia tried not to notice the way it curled slightly at the nape of his neck, or how he smelled like leather and wood smoke and something earthy she couldn't name. When she finished, he ran a hand through his hair and nodded once. Better. Much better. Annie thrived in the open space of the ranch. She named all the chickens, Rosie, Daisy, Buttercup, Marigold, Poppy, and Violet, and appointed herself their official guardian. She collected eggs every morning with solemn dedication. She climbed trees, chased butterflies, and came inside every evening with dirty knees and stories about her adventures. She laughed again. And that, more than anything, made Lydia feel like they'd found something worth fighting for. But the peace was fragile. Lydia knew it. She saw it in the way Caleb sometimes stopped mid-task and stared at nothing, his face carved from stone. She heard it in the nightmares that made him cry out in his sleep, muffled sounds of anguish that made her chest ache. He was drowning in ghosts, and Lydia didn't know how to reach him. 3 weeks into their stay, Caleb came back from town with supplies and a grim expression. Lydia was kneading bread dough when he walked in and dropped a burlap sack on the table with more force than necessary. Flour, sugar, coffee, and a small cloth bag that clinked with the sound of coins. "What's wrong?" she asked, wiping flour from her hands. Caleb pulled off his hat and tossed it onto a chair. "Barrett Clay's asking questions." Lydia's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "About you. About where you went." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He's been telling people I stole his collateral. Says he has a legal claim to your daughter." "That's insane. You paid the debt." He's twisting it, saying the contract wasn't voided, just transferred. That Annie belongs to whoever holds the debt, and since I paid it, I'm responsible for her. Caleb's eyes were dark with anger. It's horseshit legal maneuvering, but he's got the sheriff's ear. Lydia's hands started shaking. She pressed them flat against the table to hide it. "What does that mean?" "It means he's going to try to take her back. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon." Caleb's voice was low and dangerous. He doesn't like being humiliated, especially not in front of the whole town. "Then what do we do?" "We." Caleb looked at her sharply. "You think I'm going to let him take my daughter without a fight? I think you're going to get hurt if you try to stand up to him. Then I'll get hurt." Lydia's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. "I've already lost a husband. I've already lost my home. I am not losing my child." Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to the window and looked out at the valley, his shoulders rigid with tension. "He'll bring men," Caleb said. "I can handle 2, maybe 3, but if he shows up with a full crew, then we'll figure it out." "Lydia, don't." She moved to stand beside him close enough to see the muscle jumping in his jaw. "Don't tell me to run. Don't tell me to hide. I've done enough of that." Caleb turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You don't understand what men like Barrett are capable of." I understand that he tried to rip my daughter out of my arms in broad daylight. I understand that he's a bully who preys on people with no power to fight back. Lydia lifted her chin. But I'm not powerless anymore. I have you. The words hung between them, intimate and dangerous. Caleb's expression shifted surprise, then something darker and more complicated. He took a step back, putting distance between them. You shouldn't rely on me. Why not? You've given us shelter. You've protected us. I failed before. The words came out harsh, like they'd been dragged up from somewhere deep and painful. I couldn't protect my own family. What makes you think I can protect yours? And there it was. The wound he'd been hiding beneath all that silence. Lydia's anger drained away, replaced by something softer and more dangerous. What happened to them, Caleb? He turned away, his whole body radiating refusal. Caleb. Fever. The word was barely audible. My wife got sick first. I rode 20 miles for a doctor, but by the time we got back, his voice broke. She was gone. And Emma, our daughter, she was only 6 months old, too young to fight it. Lydia's hand went to her mouth. Oh God. I buried them on the hill behind the barn, under the cottonwood tree. Caleb's shoulders rose and fell with harsh breaths. It's been 3 years, and some days I still wake up expecting to hear Emma crying, or Sarah's voice calling me in for breakfast. I'm sorry, Lydia whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring them back. It doesn't... He stopped, shook his head sharply. I'm not the hero you think I am, Lydia. I'm just a man who couldn't save the people who mattered most. Lydia wanted to cross the room and touch him to offer some kind of comfort, but she knew instinctively that he'd pull away. So instead, she stayed where she was and spoke the truth. You saved us. That was luck. No. Her voice was firm. That was choice. You chose to step in when no one else would. You chose to give us shelter when you didn't have to. Those were your choices, Caleb. And they mattered. He didn't respond, but his breathing gradually slowed, and some of the terrible tension left his shoulders. After a long silence, he spoke again. Barrett won't stop coming. Then we'll be ready. Lydia, I mean it. She moved to the table and picked up the bag of coins he'd brought back. How much is here? $12. Payment for some horses I sold. And you have more saved. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Why? Because if Barrett wants a legal fight, we'll give him one. We'll find a lawyer. We'll get papers that prove the debt was paid and the contract voided. We'll make it impossible for him to claim any right to Annie. Lawyers cost money. Then we'll find the money. Lydia set the coin bag down with a decisive thud. I'm not running anymore, Caleb. I'm done being afraid. Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You're stubborn. I'm a mother. Those might be the same thing. It wasn't quite a joke, but it was close. And coming from Caleb, it felt like a gift. Lydia allowed herself a small smile. They usually are. That night, after Annie had fallen asleep, Lydia sat on the porch steps and looked up at the stars. They were impossibly bright out here, away from town, thousands of pinpricks of light against the black canvas of sky. She'd forgotten how beautiful they could be. The door opened behind her, and Caleb stepped out. He didn't say anything, just sat down on the other end of the step and pulled out his tobacco pouch. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, a horse nickering softly in the barn, wind rustling through the cottonwoods down by the creek. I used to come out here every night, Caleb said eventually. After they died, I'd sit here and try to figure out why I was still breathing when they weren't. Lydia's throat tightened. Did you ever figure it out? No. He lit his cigarette and took a long drag, the ember glowing orange in the darkness. But eventually I stopped asking. That sounds lonely. It was. Caleb exhaled smoke into the night air. Still is most days. It doesn't have to be. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and Lydia felt something shift between them. Something fragile and new and terrifying. You should go inside, Caleb said quietly. It's getting cold. It was a dismissal, but this time Lydia didn't take it. In a minute, she said. The stars are too pretty to miss. Caleb didn't argue. He just took another drag of his cigarette and went back to staring at the darkness. And for the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel quite so alone. 2 days later, Barrett Clay came to the ranch. Lydia was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She looked up, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun, and felt her blood turn to ice. 6 riders. Barrett in the lead, his 2 brothers flanking him, and 3 other men Lydia didn't recognize. They rode slowly, deliberately, like men who knew they had power and wanted everyone else to know it too. Annie! Lydia's voice came out sharp with fear. Get inside. Now! Annie, who'd been playing near the chicken coop, looked up in confusion. But Mama! Now Annie. Something in Lydia's tone made the child run. She disappeared into the house just as the riders pulled up in front of the porch. Barrett dismounted with theatrical slowness. He was dressed too well for a ranch visit in a pressed suit and polished boots. His smile was cold and calculating. Mrs. Harrow, what a pleasure to see you again. Lydia's hands curled into fists. Get off this property. Now, is that any way to greet a concerned citizen? Barrett brushed dust from his sleeves. I'm here on official business. Sheriff Dalton has authorized me to collect on a debt. There is no debt. Caleb paid it. Caleb Rowan paid my monetary claim, yes. But the contract regarding your daughter remains valid. Barrett pulled a folded document from his coat. You see, when you signed this agreement, you pledged the child as collateral. That collateral wasn't released, it was merely transferred to Mr. Rowan when he assumed your debt. Since Mr. Rowan has no legal standing as the child's guardian, the collateral reverts to me. It was insane. Twisted legal logic that made no sense. But Lydia could see from Barrett's smug expression that he believed he'd found a loophole. You're not taking her, Lydia said. Her voice shook, but held firm. I don't care what your fake document says. You're not taking my daughter. I'm afraid I am. Barrett gestured to his men. Pike Vernon, go get the girl. The brothers started toward the house. Lydia's heart hammered. She looked around desperately for something, anything to use as a weapon. Her eyes landed on the axe Caleb used to split firewood leaning against the side of the house. She lunged for it. Pike caught her arm before she reached it. He twisted hard, and pain shot through her shoulder as he forced her to her knees. Let go of her! Everyone turned. Annie stood in the doorway, small and terrified, but holding Caleb's hunting rifle. It was nearly as tall as she was, and she could barely lift it, but her finger was on the trigger. Barrett's smile widened. Well, isn't that precious? Annie, no. Lydia struggled against Pike's grip. Put the gun down, baby. But Annie didn't lower the rifle. Tears streamed down her face, but her small hands held steady. Don't hurt my mama. Vernon, Barrett said calmly. Take the gun from the child. Vernon started forward. A shot rang out. Vernon dropped like a stone, screaming and clutching his leg. Blood spread across his pants in a dark stain. Everyone froze. Caleb stood at the corner of the barn, his own rifle raised and smoking. His face was carved from stone, and his eyes were cold enough to freeze hell. The next one goes through your skull, Barrett. Barrett's confidence cracked. You just shot a man? I shot a man trying to hurt a child. Any lawman with sense will call that justified. Caleb worked the bolt on his rifle, chambering another round. Get off my land. This isn't over. It is. Caleb's voice was deadly quiet. You come near this family again, I'll kill you. Not wound you, not scare you, kill you. Do you understand me? Barrett's face flushed red with rage and humiliation. Vernon was still on the ground moaning and clutching his bleeding leg. Pike released Lydia and backed toward his horse, hands raised. "You've made a mistake, Rowan," Barrett hissed. "A big one." "Then come back and do something about it." Caleb didn't lower the rifle. "I'll be waiting." For a long, tense moment, Lydia thought Barrett would try to call Caleb's bluff. His hand twitched toward the gun at his hip, and Lydia's breath stopped in her chest. Then Barrett's brothers grabbed Vernon and hauled him onto his horse. The wounded man howled in pain, but no one paid him any attention. Barrett mounted his own horse, glaring down at Caleb with murder in his eyes. "You'll regret this." "I doubt it." Barrett wheeled his horse around and spurred it hard. The other riders followed, kicking up clouds of dust as they thundered down the road and out of sight. The silence they left behind was deafening. Caleb finally lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking barely, but Lydia saw it. She pulled free from where she'd fallen and ran to Annie, scooping her daughter up and holding her so tightly the child squeaked. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. You're safe." Annie sobbed into Lydia's shoulder, the rifle clattering forgotten to the porch. "I didn't want them to hurt you, Mama. I didn't want—" I know, sweetheart." Lydia rocked her, pressing kisses to her hair. "You were so brave. So brave." Caleb approached slowly, like he was afraid of spooking them. When Lydia looked up at him, she saw something raw and vulnerable in his face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Lydia shook her head. "You came back." "I never left. I was in the barn when I heard the horses." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I should have been closer. Should have— You saved us." Lydia stood still, holding Annie. "Again. I shot a man. You protected us." Barrett meant what he said. He'll come back with more men. The law, maybe, if he can twist the story right. Then we'll fight. Lydia, I said we'll fight. She shifted Annie to her hip and looked Caleb dead in the eye. "This is our home now. Yours, mine, Annie's. And no one, not Barrett Clay, not the law, not God himself, is going to take that away from us. Do you understand?" Caleb stared at her, and slowly, finally he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I understand." That night they barricaded the doors and kept the lamps burning late. Caleb cleaned his rifle and loaded extra ammunition, while Lydia checked every window latch and lock. Annie slept fitfully between them, waking at every sound. Around midnight, Lydia found Caleb on the porch again, rifle across his knees, keeping watch. She brought him coffee and sat down beside him. "You should be sleeping," Caleb said. "So should you." "Can't." "Because you're afraid they'll come back tonight." "Because I keep seeing that little girl holding a rifle." Caleb's voice was rough with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "She's 4 years old, Lydia. She shouldn't have to be that afraid." "She won't be. Not anymore." Lydia set her hand on his arm, feeling the tension coiled there like a spring. "We're going to end this. Together." Caleb looked at her hand, then at her face. In the dim starlight, his eyes were dark and unreadable. "Why do you trust me?" he asked. "You barely know me." "I know enough." Lydia didn't move her hand. "I know you're a good man who's been hurt. I know you think you failed your family, but you didn't. You loved them, and sometimes love isn't enough to stop bad things from happening. I know you gave us shelter when we had nowhere else to go, and I know that when it mattered, you stood between my daughter and the men who wanted to hurt her." Her voice softened. "That's all I need to know, Caleb." Something broke in his expression, some wall he'd been holding up for 3 years. He turned his hand palm up beneath hers, and his fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. "I won't let them take her," he said. "I promise you that." "I know." They sat there together as the night deepened around them, hands linked and hearts aligned, and for the first time since everything had gone wrong, Lydia let herself believe they might actually survive this. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. Barrett didn't return that night, or the next. But his shadow hung over the ranch like a coming storm, and everyone felt it. Caleb barely slept. Lydia would wake in the pre-dawn darkness and see lamplight under his door, hear his boots pacing the floorboards. When he finally emerged, his face was drawn with exhaustion, but he'd just shake his head when she asked if he was all right, and head out to the corrals. Lydia threw herself into work to keep the fear at bay. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, baked more bread than they could eat, mended clothes that didn't need mending. Her hands needed to stay busy, or her mind would spiral into dark places, imagining Barrett returning with a dozen men, imagining Annie torn from her arms again, imagining Caleb bleeding in the dirt because he'd tried to protect them. Annie felt it too. She stopped naming the chickens new names every day. She stayed close to the house, jumping at every sudden sound. At night, she crawled into bed with Lydia and whispered, "Is Mr. Quiet going to make the bad men go away forever?" Lydia didn't know how to answer that. So she just held her daughter and hummed until sleep came. On the third morning after the confrontation, Caleb came in from the barn with mud on his boots and determination in his eyes. "We're going to town," he announced. Lydia looked up from the stove where she was frying eggs. "What?" "You were right. We need a lawyer, someone who can look at that contract and tell us where Barrett's lying." Caleb pulled out a chair and sat heavily. "Tom Henderson. He's got a spread about 10 miles south. He mentioned once that his brother-in-law practices law in Cheyenne. I'm going to ride over and ask if he knows anyone closer." "I'm coming with you." "No." "Yes." Lydia set down the spatula and crossed her arms. "If we're going to fight this, I need to be part of it. That contract has my name on it, not yours." "And Annie?" Lydia hesitated. She didn't want to leave her daughter alone, but she also didn't want to bring her into potential danger. "We could bring her." "No." Caleb's voice was firm. "She's been through enough. She stays here where it's safe. Alone. With Martha Henderson, Tom's wife. She's good people, and she's got 3 kids of her own. Annie can spend the day there while we handle business." It made sense. Lydia hated it, but it made sense. "All right," she said. "When do we leave?" "After breakfast. I'll hitch the wagon." They ate quickly and in silence. Annie sensed something was happening and kept looking between them with worried eyes. When Lydia explained that she'd be spending the day with Mrs. Henderson and her children, Annie's face crumpled. "You're leaving me." "Just for today, sweetheart. We'll be back before supper." "What if the bad men come?" Lydia knelt and pulled Annie into her arms. "They won't. And Mr. Quiet and I are going to make sure they never can again. Do you trust me?" Annie nodded against her shoulder, but her small body was tense with fear. "I need you to be brave one more time," Lydia whispered. "Can you do that?" Another nod. "That's my girl." The ride to the Henderson ranch took an hour. Caleb drove the wagon in silence, his jaw set and his eyes scanning the horizon like he expected trouble to appear from behind every hill. Lydia sat beside him with Annie in her lap, feeling every bump and jolt in the road. Martha Henderson was a sturdy woman in her 40s, with flour in her hair and a warm smile that didn't quite hide the worry in her eyes. She'd clearly heard about what happened at Caleb's ranch, everyone had apparently, and she pulled Lydia into a quick, fierce hug before Lydia could say a word. "You're doing the right thing," Martha said. "Barrett Clay's been terrorizing this valley for too long. Someone needs to stand up to him. We're trying. And we're behind you. All of us." Martha looked at Caleb, who was lifting Annie down from the wagon. "Tom's around back working on the plow if you want to talk to him about his brother-in-law. And don't you worry about this little one. She'll have a fine time with my 3. As if on cue, 3 children came barreling out of the house, 2 boys and a girl ranging from about 6 to 10. They surrounded Annie with the enthusiasm of puppies, already chattering about games and exploring and the new kittens in the barn. Annie looked back at Lydia with uncertainty, and Lydia gave her the most reassuring smile she could manage. "Go on, baby. Have fun." Martha took Annie's hand. We'll take good care of her. You two do what you need to do. Caleb found Tom Henderson behind the barn, swearing at a rusted piece of farm equipment. Tom looked up when they approached, wiped grease from his hands, and offered a genuine smile. Caleb, good to see you, friend. Hell of a thing that happened at your place. Yeah. Caleb shoved his hands in his pockets. I need advice. Legal advice. Martha said your brother-in-law's a lawyer. Was. He passed 2 years back. Tom's expression turned thoughtful. But there's a young fellow in Dustridge who set up practice last year. Daniel Garrett. Fresh out of some fancy Eastern school, but he seems sharp enough. Helped me with a land dispute. Dustridge. Caleb's jaw tightened. That's Barrett's territory. It's also the county seat. Only place with a proper courthouse within 50 miles. Tom glanced at Lydia, then back at Caleb. You afraid of going back there? I'm not afraid of anything. I just don't want to walk into a trap. Garrett's office is right on Main Street, 2 doors down from the bank. Middle of the day, plenty of witnesses. Barrett may be a bastard, but even he won't try anything in broad daylight with that many people around. Tom hesitated. Probably. Caleb looked at Lydia. Your call. Lydia thought about Annie's face when they'd ridden away. Thought about waking up every morning not knowing if today would be the day Barrett came back with enough men to overwhelm them. Thought about living in fear for the rest of her life. We go, she said. Tom gave them directions to Garrett's office and wished them luck. As Caleb helped Lydia back into the wagon, Martha appeared with a basket covered in cloth. Food for the road, she said, pressing it into Lydia's hands. And Lydia, don't let them make you feel small. You're a mother protecting her child. There's nothing in this world more powerful than that. Lydia's eyes stung with unexpected tears. Thank you. The ride to Dustridge took another 2 hours. The town appeared on the horizon like a collection of broken teeth-weathered buildings, lining a dusty main street. Wagons and horses clustered near the general store and saloon. It looked the same as it had 3 weeks ago, but Lydia felt different. Stronger somehow. Like she'd left this place as a victim and returned as something else. Caleb tied the wagon outside a modest building with a freshly painted sign, Daniel Garrett, Attorney at Law. They stood on the wooden walkway for a moment, both gathering courage. Lydia could feel eyes on them, townspeople recognizing her, recognizing Caleb, whispering behind hands and storefront windows. You ready? Caleb asked quietly. Lydia squared her shoulders. Let's end this. The office was small but neat. A desk covered in paper shelves lined with law books, a single window letting in dusty afternoon light. A young man sat behind the desk, maybe 30 years old, with sandy hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked up when they entered and immediately stood, extending his hand. Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Garrett. How can I help you folks? Caleb shook his hand. We need to contest a contract, one that's being used to justify kidnapping a child. Garrett's eyebrows shot up. That's quite an accusation. Please sit down. Tell me everything. So they did. Lydia explained about Thomas's death, about falling behind on rent, about the marketplace incident. Caleb described the confrontation at the ranch, Vernon's gunshot wound, Barrett's threats. Garrett listened without interrupting, making notes in careful handwriting. When they finished, he sat back and removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. Do you have the original contract? He asked. No. Barrett has it. Did you read it before signing? Lydia felt her face heat with shame. No, I was desperate. I needed a place to stay, and Barrett said it was standard boarding house terms. I didn't. I should have read it, but I didn't. Don't apologize for being in an impossible situation. Mrs. Harrow, men like Barrett Clay prey on desperation. It's what they do. Garrett replaced his spectacles and tapped his pen against the desk. Here's the problem. Without seeing the actual contract, I can't tell you exactly what legal ground we're standing on. But I can tell you that in the Wyoming Territory, you cannot sign away custody of your child through a rental agreement. It's not legally possible. Hope flared in Lydia's chest. Then he has no claim. In theory, No. In practice. Garrett grimaced. Barrett has money and influence. He's friendly with Sheriff Dalton, friendly with the judge. If he pushes this to court, he'll make your lives hell even if he loses. So what do we do? Caleb's voice was hard. We force his hand. We file a formal complaint accusing him of attempted kidnapping and extortion. We get it on the public record. Then we demand he produce this supposed contract in front of a neutral arbiter, preferably a judge from outside this county who isn't in Barrett's pocket. Lydia leaned forward. Will that work? It might, or it might make him angrier. There's no safe path here, Mrs. Harrow, but doing nothing guarantees he keeps coming after you. Caleb and Lydia exchanged a look. She could see the question in his eyes. Are you sure you want to do this? And she answered with the smallest nod. File the complaint, Lydia said. Garrett smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I'll draft the paperwork today. We'll need both of your signatures and a witness. Can you come back tomorrow? We'll be here. They settled on a fee less than Lydia expected, and she suspected Garrett was giving them a discount out of principle and left the office feeling cautiously optimistic. But the optimism died the moment they stepped outside. Barrett Clay stood in the middle of Main Street with 6 men behind him. Not his usual thugs, these men wore deputy badges and carried rifles. Sheriff Dalton stood at Barrett's right shoulder, his face carefully neutral. Well, well, Barrett said loudly enough for the whole street to hear. Look who decided to show their faces in town. Caleb Rowan, the man who shot my brother. Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward his hip, but he wasn't wearing his gun. They'd left their weapons in the wagon, not wanting to walk into a lawyer's office armed. Stupid. They'd been stupid and careless, and now they were trapped. Vernon's leg is infected, Barrett continued, stepping forward. Doctor says he might lose it. That's assault with a deadly weapon, Rowan. That's prison time. He was attacking my property, Caleb said evenly. Any jury would call it self-defense. Your property. Barrett smiled that cold smile. You mean the squatters you're harboring? The woman who owes me a debt, and the child who's legally mine? You lying son of a... Sheriff Dalton held up a hand. That's enough. Caleb Rowan, I'm placing you under arrest for assault. You'll come with me peacefully, or my deputies will drag you. Lydia's heart stopped. No, you can't. Ma'am, stay out of this. Dalton's tone was almost apologetic, but his hand rested on his gun. This is the law. This is corruption. Lydia's voice rang out across the street. Barrett Clay tried to kidnap my daughter, and you're arresting the man who protected us. Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. People were stopping to watch, drawn by the confrontation. Lydia saw uncertainty on some faces, calculation on others. Barrett's smile widened. The woman's hysterical, understandable given her circumstances. Sheriff, perhaps she should be detained as well, until we can sort out this custody matter. Don't touch her! Caleb's voice was deadly quiet. He stepped in front of Lydia, shielding her with his body. You want me, fine. I'll go. But you leave her alone. Caleb, no. He looked back at her, and the expression on his face made her throat close. Go to the Hendersons. Get Annie. Take the wagon and go back to the ranch. Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but me. I'm not leaving you. Lydia. He caught her hand, squeezed once hard. Please. The deputies were moving forward. In seconds, they'd have Caleb in chains, and then they'd come for her, and Annie would have no one. Lydia wanted to scream, wanted to fight. But Caleb's eyes were begging her to be smart to survive, to protect their daughter. Their daughter. When had she started thinking of Annie that way, as belonging to both of them? I'll come back for you, she whispered. I swear to God, Caleb, I'll come back. I know. Then the deputies grabbed him. They wrenched his arms behind his back and clamped iron cuffs around his wrists. Caleb didn't fight. He just kept his eyes on Lydia as they dragged him toward the sheriff's office. Barrett stepped into her path, blocking her view. You should leave town, Mrs. Harrow. There's nothing for you here. Go to hell. Probably will eventually, but not today. Barrett leaned in close enough that she could smell whiskey on his breath. Your protector's in a cell. Your lawyer can't help you. And that contract I have says your daughter belongs to whoever holds your debt, which is me now that Rowan's going to prison. The contract's a lie. Maybe, maybe not. Want to find out in court? Barrett's smile was vicious. Because I promise you, Mrs. Harrow, by the time the judge is done listening to me, you'll be branded an unfit mother, and Annie will be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Is that what you want? Lydia's hands curled into fists. She wanted to claw his eyes out, wanted to scream until her throat bled. But she forced herself to stay calm to think. Caleb had told her to go, to get to safety. And as much as she hated it, he was right. She couldn't help him from inside a cell. This isn't over, she said. It is, sweetheart. You just don't know it yet. Lydia turned and walked away before he could see the tears burning in her eyes. She made it to the wagon, climbed up, and took the reins with shaking hands. The ride back to the Henderson ranch blurred past like a nightmare. Martha took one look at Lydia's face and pulled her inside. What happened? They arrested him. Barrett had the sheriff arrest Caleb for shooting Vernon, and now, Lydia's voice broke. Now I don't know what to do. You fight. Lydia looked up through tears. How I have no money, no influence, no... You have us. Martha gripped her shoulders. Every rancher in this valley knows what Barrett's doing. We've been too scared to stand up to him, but Caleb did. He put himself between you and those bastards, and now he's paying for it. You think we're going to let that stand? What can you do? More than you think. Martha's eyes blazed with determination. Tom's already riding to round up the neighbors. We're going to Dustridge tomorrow, all of us, and we're going to make sure the law understands that Caleb Rowan has friends, lots of them. Hope flickered in Lydia's chest, fragile but real. You'd do that. Honey Barrett Clay's been squeezing this valley dry for years. Someone finally stood up to him, and we'll be damned if we let him destroy that man for it. Annie appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. Where's Mr. Quiet? Lydia pulled her daughter close. He's in town, baby, town. But he's going to be okay. We're going to make sure of it. Promise. Lydia met Martha's eyes over her daughter's head and saw the same fierce determination reflected back at her. I promise. That night back at the ranch, Lydia couldn't sleep. She paced the empty house, jumping at every sound, expecting Barrett's men to come crashing through the door at any moment. The silence was suffocating. Even the house seemed to miss Caleb, his quiet presence, his steady footsteps, the smell of tobacco smoke drifting in from the porch. Lydia found herself in his room without meaning to. She'd never been inside before. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but now she pushed open the door and stepped across the threshold. The room was sparse. A narrow bed with a plain quilt. A dresser with a single photograph, the same one in Lydia's room showing his wife and baby daughter. A wooden chair. And on the bedside table a small leather journal. Lydia picked it up with trembling hands and opened to a random page. Caleb's careful handwriting filled the lines. 3 years today. I thought it would get easier, but it doesn't. The silence is worse than the grief. At least grief feels like something. This is just empty. She turned pages, reading fragments of a man's broken heart. I dream about Emma every night. She's always just out of reach. Sold 6 horses today. Good price. Doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Why am I still here? What's the point of surviving when everyone I loved is gone? Tears streamed down Lydia's face. She'd known Caleb was hurting, but seeing it written out in his own hand, seeing the depth of his loneliness and despair, it broke something in her. She flipped to the most recent entry dated the day after Barrett's first visit to the ranch. Lydia says we'll fight. She says this is our home. Our home. I don't know when I started thinking of it that way, but I have. The house doesn't feel empty anymore. Annie's laugh fills the corners where Emma's used to be. And Lydia, she's strong in ways Sarah never had to be. Watching her refuse to break, refuse to run. Maybe there's something worth fighting for after all. Lydia closed the journal and pressed it against her chest, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Caleb had given her shelter when she had nothing. Had protected her daughter like she was his own. Had started to heal in small, painful increments because he'd let them into his life. And now he was locked in a cell facing prison, or worse, because of her. "I'm coming for you," she whispered to the empty room. "I don't care what it takes. I'm coming for you." Dawn broke cold and gray. Lydia dressed Annie in her best dress and pinned up her own hair with hands that only shook a little. They were on the road before sunrise, heading back to the Henderson ranch. When they arrived, the yard was full of wagons and horses. At least 20 families had gathered, ranchers and farmers from all over the valley, men and women with weathered faces and determined eyes. Tom Henderson stood on his porch organizing the group. "We ride in together," he was saying. "Peaceful-like. We're not starting trouble, just making our position clear. Caleb Rowan's one of us, and we won't stand by while Barrett uses the law to settle a personal grudge." Martha appeared at Lydia's side. "See, I told you. You're not alone." Lydia's throat was too tight to speak. She just nodded and blinked back tears. They rode into Dustridge like an army, 20 wagons rolling down Main Street in formation, drawing stares and whispers from every storefront. People spilled out onto the walkways to watch, and Lydia saw fear and calculation on their faces. Barrett had ruled this town through intimidation for so long that resistance had become unthinkable. Until now. Tom Henderson pulled his wagon to a stop in front of the sheriff's office and climbed down. The others formed a loose semicircle behind him, blocking the street. Lydia stayed in her wagon with Annie, heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Tom knocked on the office door. Once, twice. Then he pushed it open and walked inside. Sheriff Dalton looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from surprise to concern when he saw the crowd through the window. "What's this about, Tom?" "It's about Justice Jim. Or the lack of it." Tom planted his hands on the desk. "You've got Caleb Rowan locked up for defending his home from armed men who were trying to kidnap a child. That's not law enforcement. That's corruption. Now you listen here. No, you listen." Tom's voice carried through the open door, and Lydia saw people on the street leaning in to hear. "Every person out there is a registered voter in this county. Every one of us pays taxes and expects the law to protect us, not serve the interests of rich men like Barrett Clay. You release Caleb, or come election time, you'll find yourself looking for new work." Dalton's face flushed red. "You're threatening me. I'm informing you of political reality." Tom crossed his arms. "What's it going to be, Jim?" The silence stretched out like pulled taffy. Lydia held her breath. Annie gripped her hand so tightly it hurt. Then a voice called out from the back of the crowd. "Tom's right." Another voice. "Barrett's been bleeding us dry for years." A woman Lydia recognized from church. "We're with you, Mrs. Harrow." The murmurs built into a roar of agreement. 20 voices became 30, then 40, as townspeople who'd been too scared to speak up before suddenly found their courage in numbers. Sheriff Dalton's face went from red to pale. He looked at the crowd, then at Tom, then toward the cells in the back room where Caleb was presumably locked up. "This is highly irregular," he muttered. "So is arresting a man for self-defense," Tom shot back. Dalton stood slowly, pulled keys from his belt, and disappeared into the back. Lydia stopped breathing. The crowd fell silent. When the sheriff emerged, Caleb was with him. He looked exhausted. Hair mussed, jaw dark with stubble, his shirt wrinkled from sleeping in it. But his eyes found Lydia immediately. The relief in his expression made her heart stutter. "You're free to go, Rowan," Dalton said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "But you stay out of trouble, you hear me?" Caleb didn't answer. He just walked out of the office and down the steps, and the crowd parted to let him through. He made his way straight to Lydia's wagon. "You came back," he said, his voice rough. "I told you I would." "With an army, apparently." "Friends," Lydia corrected. "You have friends, Caleb, whether you want them or not." Something in his expression cracked. He looked around at the assembled ranchers' people he'd barely spoken to in 3 years, and Lydia saw him realize he wasn't alone anymore. That he'd never really been alone. He just hadn't let himself see it. Tom Henderson clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, friend. Let's get you home." They rode back in a caravan, the morning sun burning off the clouds and turning the sky brilliant blue. Annie fell asleep against Lydia's side, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster. Caleb rode beside their wagon on a borrowed horse, and every few minutes Lydia would glance over and find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When they finally reached the ranch, the other families said their goodbyes and headed home, promising to help however they could if Barrett caused more trouble. Tom was the last to leave. "You need anything, and I mean anything, you send word," he told Caleb. "We're neighbors. That means something out here." "It does," Caleb agreed quietly. "Thank you." When the last wagon disappeared over the hill, Lydia carried sleeping Annie inside and tucked her into bed. When she came back out, Caleb was sitting on the porch steps with his head in his hands. Lydia sat beside him. "You shouldn't have come for me," he said without looking up. "I wasn't leaving you in that cell. You could have been arrested. Barrett could have taken Annie while you were gone. He didn't. And you're free." Lydia touched his arm. "We won, Caleb." "Did we?" He finally looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. "Barrett's still out there. He's still got money and influence. All we did today was embarrass him in front of the whole town. Men like him don't forget that." "Then we'll keep fighting." "For how long?" "Until someone gets killed." Caleb's voice cracked. "I can't, Lydia. I can't watch another person I care about get hurt because of me." The words hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. "Another person I care about." Lydia's heart hammered. "Caleb. I should send you away. Give you money, help you start over somewhere Barrett can't find you. It's the smart thing to do. I'm not going anywhere." "You should." "Well, I'm not." Lydia shifted to face him fully. "You want to know why? Because this is the first place that's felt like home since Thomas died. Because Annie laughs here. Because you—" Her voice caught. "Because you gave us a life when we had nothing. And I'm not walking away from that. I'm not walking away from you." Caleb stared at her, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes, fear battling hope, grief battling something newer and more fragile. "I'm broken, Lydia," he whispered. I'm not the man you think I am." "You're exactly the man I think you are. You're stubborn and self-sacrificing, and you think you don't deserve good things. But you do, Caleb. You deserve to be happy again." "I don't know how." "Then let me teach you." She leaned forward and kissed him. It was gentle and tentative, a question more than a statement. For a heartbeat, Caleb froze, and Lydia thought she'd made a terrible mistake, had pushed too far, had misread everything. Then his hand came up to cup her face, and he kissed her back. It was like something breaking open. 3 years of loneliness and grief pouring out in the way his lips moved against hers, in the trembling of his fingers against her cheek, in the small broken sound he made when she pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb pressed his forehead against hers. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "I can't lose anyone else." "You won't. We're stronger together." Lydia's hands framed his face. "All of us, you, me, Annie. We're a family now, and families fight for each other." "Family," Caleb repeated like he was testing the word. Then softer. "Yeah. Yeah, we are." They sat there as the sun climbed higher, hands intertwined and hearts cautiously opening. The road ahead was still dangerous. Barrett wouldn't give up easily. But for the first time, Lydia let herself believe They might actually survive this. Together. The kiss changed everything, and nothing at all. Life on the ranch continued in its familiar rhythms. Caleb rose before dawn to tend the horses Lydia cooked and cleaned, and kept the house running. Annie chased chickens and collected eggs. But underneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. The silence between them became comfortable instead of painful. Hands brushed during dinner and lingered instead of pulling away. At night, Caleb still sat on the porch, but now Lydia joined him without asking permission, and they'd talk until the stars came out. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Sometimes the quiet was enough. Annie noticed, of course. Children always did. "Are you and Mr. Quiet going to get married?" she asked one afternoon while Lydia was kneading bread. Lydia nearly dropped the dough. "What makes you ask that?" "Because he looks at you the way Papa used to look at you. Like you're the best thing he ever saw." Annie swung her legs from where she sat on the counter. "And you smile different now, like you're happy again." Lydia's throat tightened. She hadn't realized she'd stopped smiling, really smiling, until Annie pointed out that she'd started again. "Would it bother you if Caleb and I—" "No." Annie shook her head firmly. "Mr. Quiet's nice. He saved us, and he's teaching me how to ride the horses." "He is. He says every rancher needs to know how to handle a horse. He put me on the gentle one yesterday, Daisy, and walked me around the corral." Annie's eyes shone with pride. "I didn't fall off once." Lydia made a mental note to thank Caleb for that, for taking time out of his endless work to make a little girl feel capable and brave, for being the father figure Annie needed without trying to replace the one she'd lost. That evening, after Annie had gone to bed, Lydia found Caleb in the barn, rubbing down one of the horses. The lantern light cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. "Annie told me you're teaching her to ride," Lydia said from the doorway. Caleb looked up surprised. "Hope that's all right. Should have asked first." "It's more than all right. Thank you." He went back to brushing the horse's flank in long, steady strokes. "She's a natural. Fearless. Reminds me of Emma sometimes." It was the first time he'd mentioned his daughter without his voice breaking. Progress, Lydia thought. Small, but real. She moved closer, running her hand along the horse's neck. The animal huffed warm breath against her palm. "Do you still think about them every day?" "Every day." Caleb set down the brush and looked at her. "But it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. Used to feel like drowning. Now it's more like remembering something beautiful that's gone. Does that make sense?" "It does. You did that. You and Annie. You reminded me that life doesn't end just because part of it dies." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. "I'm grateful for that. Even if everything else goes to hell, I'm grateful I got to feel human again." Lydia caught his hand and held it against her cheek. "Nothing's going to hell. We're going to win this, Caleb. We have to." "I wish I had your faith." "Then borrow mine until you find your own." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and resting his chin on top of her head. They stood like that in the warm barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses and honest work. And Lydia let herself believe just for a moment that everything might actually be okay. But Barrett Clay had other plans. The trouble started 3 days later when Caleb rode into town for supplies. He'd been gone less than an hour when a rider came thundering up to the ranch, a young man Lydia recognized as one of Tom Henderson's sons. "Mrs. Harrow," he called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "You need to come quick. There's trouble in town." Lydia's stomach dropped. "What kind of trouble?" "Barrett Clay's got Caleb cornered in the saloon. There's talk of a fight, a real one. My pa sent me to fetch you. Thought maybe you could talk sense into them before someone gets killed." Lydia's mind raced. Annie was inside playing with her corn-husk dolls, oblivious to the danger. She couldn't bring her daughter into whatever was happening in town, but she also couldn't leave her alone at the ranch. Go get Martha Henderson, she told the young man. Tell her I need her to watch Annie for an hour, maybe two. I'll meet you on the road. He nodded and spurred his horse back the way he'd come. Lydia ran inside, grabbed Caleb's spare rifle from above the mantel, and tried to keep her hands from shaking as she loaded it. Mama! Annie looked up from her dolls, sensing the tension. What's wrong? Nothing, baby. Mrs. Henderson's going to come stay with you for a little while. I need to go help Mr. Quiet with something. Is he in trouble? I don't know, but I'm going to make sure he's safe. Lydia knelt and pulled Annie into a fierce hug. You stay here with Mrs. Henderson no matter what. Don't open the door for anyone else. Promise me. I promise. Martha arrived within 20 minutes, slightly out of breath, but ready. She took one look at Lydia's face and the rifle in her hands and simply nodded. Go. We'll be fine here. Lydia kissed Annie's forehead, mounted the wagon, and drove like the devil himself was chasing her. The ride to Dustridge had never felt longer. Every minute stretched into an eternity, and Lydia's imagination conjured increasingly terrible scenarios. Caleb bleeding in the street. Caleb shot dead by Barrett's men. Caleb arrested again, this time for murder. When she finally reached town, the main street was eerily empty except for the crowd gathered outside the saloon. Lydia jumped down from the wagon and pushed through the press of bodies, ignoring the protests and shocked looks from people who thought a woman had no business being there. She burst through the saloon doors and stopped dead. The interior was dim and smelled of whiskey and sawdust. Caleb stood on one side of the room, his back to the bar, his hand resting on his gun. Barrett faced him from the other side, similarly armed with pike, and 3 other men spread out behind him. Tom Henderson and Daniel Garrett stood between them, hands raised in a gesture of peace. This is madness, Garrett was saying. Barrett, you can't just call a man out like this is the Old West. Can't I? Barrett's smile was vicious. Rowan here shot my brother. That's a debt that needs settling. Your brother was attacking my home. Caleb said, his voice deadly calm. Any man worth his salt would have done the same. You calling me not worth my salt? I'm calling you a coward who hides behind the law when it suits him and ignores it when it doesn't. Barrett's face flushed dark red. You son of a... Stop! Lydia's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Every head in the saloon turned toward her. She stepped fully into the room, the rifle held across her chest. This ends now. Lydia, get out of here, Caleb said urgently. No. This is between me and him. This is about me and my daughter, which makes it my fight too. Lydia looked at Barrett, letting all her hatred show on her face. You want someone to fight me. Leave Caleb out of it. Barrett laughed an ugly mocking sound. Look at this. The little washerwoman playing hero. How touching. I'm not playing anything. You've terrorized this town for years, and everyone's too afraid to stand up to you. Well, I'm not afraid anymore. Lydia's hands tightened on the rifle. You tried to take my daughter. You had Caleb arrested on false charges. You've done everything you can to destroy us, and it hasn't worked. So what's your next move, Barrett? Because I'm standing right here. The saloon had gone completely silent. Even the bartender had stopped moving. Barrett's expression shifted from amusement to something darker and more dangerous. You think you're brave. You're just stupid. Rowan can't protect you forever. One of these days he'll slip up, and when he does, I'll be there. And your precious little Annie will end up exactly where she belongs, working off your debt until she's old enough to fetch a good price. Lydia's vision went red. She raised the rifle and pointed it directly at Barrett's chest. Say that again? I dare you. Lydia. Caleb started moving toward her, but she shook her head sharply without taking her eyes off Barrett. Stay back, Caleb. This bastard just threatened my child. I want to hear him say it again so everyone in this room can witness what kind of man he really is. Barrett's smile faltered. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by women. You won't shoot me. Won't I? You took everything from me once. You think I won't pull this trigger to keep it from happening again? You'd hang. Maybe, but you'd still be dead. Lydia's finger moved to the trigger. Is that worth it, Barrett? Is your pride worth dying for? For the first time, she saw genuine fear flicker across Barrett's face. He looked around the saloon at Tom Henderson and Daniel Garrett, at the townspeople watching through the windows, at his own men who'd suddenly taken a step back. This isn't over, he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Yes, it is. Caleb moved to stand beside Lydia, his own hand still on his gun. You're done terrorizing this valley. You're done using the law as your personal weapon. You're done threatening my family. Your family, Barrett sneered, but it sounded forced. You mean your whore and her... Caleb's fist connected with Barrett's jaw before anyone could blink. The bigger man stumbled backward, crashed into a table, and went down hard. Pike moved forward, but Caleb's gun was out and aimed before Pike took 2 steps. Anyone else? Caleb's voice was ice cold. Anyone else want to insult my wife? The word hung in the air. Wife. Lydia's heart stuttered. They weren't married, not legally, but Caleb had just claimed her in front of the whole town, had drawn a line in the sand and dared anyone to cross it. Barrett dragged himself upright, spitting blood. You'll regret this, Rowan. I regret not doing it sooner. Barrett looked around at his men, clearly expecting them to back him up. But they just stood there, uncertain. The crowd outside had grown, and Lydia could see the calculation on their faces. Barrett had been beaten and humiliated twice now. His grip on the town was slipping. Get out, Tom Henderson said quietly. Barrett, just get out, before this gets worse. For a long moment, Barrett didn't move. Then he straightened his coat, wiped blood from his mouth, and stalked toward the door. He paused when he reached Lydia close enough that she could smell the copper scent of blood on him. This isn't over, he whispered. Yes, Lydia said clearly. It is. Barrett left his men trailing behind him like whipped dogs. The tension in the saloon broke, and people started talking all at once. Caleb holstered his gun and gently took the rifle from Lydia's trembling hands. You shouldn't have come, he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only worry and something that looked like awe. Someone had to stop you from getting yourself killed. I had it under control. You were about to draw on 5 armed men. That's not control, that's suicide. Lydia's legs suddenly felt weak, and she sagged against him. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving her shaky and exhausted. Caleb caught her supporting her weight easily. Come on, let's get you home. Daniel Garrett approached as they headed for the door. Mrs. Harrow, Mr. Rowan, I'll file that formal complaint we discussed, today. After this little display, I think we'll find the court more sympathetic to your case. Thank you, Lydia managed. The ride back to the ranch passed in a blur. Caleb drove while Lydia sat beside him trying to process everything that had just happened. She'd pointed a loaded rifle at a man and meant it. Would have pulled the trigger if he'd pushed her. The realization was both terrifying and strangely empowering. You called me your wife, she said finally. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. I know. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have presumed. Don't apologize. Lydia put her hand over his. I liked it. He looked at her surprised. You did? Yes, because it's true, isn't it? Maybe not legally, but in every way that matters. We're a family, Caleb. You, me, Annie. We take care of each other. We protect each other. That's what families do. I don't have a ring. Can't afford one yet. I don't need a ring. I just need you to mean it. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road. He turned to face her fully, his expression more open and vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. Lydia Harrow, I'm not good with words. I'm broken and scarred, and probably not what you deserve. But if you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you and Annie are safe and loved and happy. I'll build you a life where you never have to be afraid again. That's my promise." Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks. "That's all I've ever wanted. That and you." He kissed her, then soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling real smiles that reached their eyes and chased away years of grief. "So is that a yes?" Caleb asked. "That's a yes." They made it back to the ranch to find Martha and Annie making bread together, flour dusted across both their faces. Annie took one look at her mother's expression and squealed with delight. "You're smiling." The big smile. Lydia laughed and scooped her daughter up. "I am, because Mr. Quiet just asked me to marry him." Annie's eyes went wide. "And you said yes." "I said yes." "So he's going to be my papa now." Lydia glanced at Caleb, who'd frozen in the doorway. The word papa clearly hit him hard, brought up memories of Emma and all he'd lost. But then his expression softened, and he knelt down to Annie's eye level. "If that's all right with you," he said gently, "I know I can't replace your real papa, but I'd be honored to take care of you like he would have." Annie threw her arms around his neck with the unconscious trust of childhood. "I think my real papa would like you. You're brave and nice, and you make Mama happy." Caleb's arms came around the little girl, and Lydia saw tears shine in his eyes. "I'll do my best to keep making her happy. I promise." Martha dabbed at her own eyes with her apron. "Well, this calls for a celebration. I'll have Tom bring over some of his good whiskey, and we'll have a proper engagement party." "No party," Caleb said quickly, standing with Annie still in his arms. "Not yet. Not until the situation with Barrett is fully resolved." His words were a splash of cold water reminding them all that the danger wasn't over. Barrett had been humiliated again, and men like him didn't just walk away. They plotted, they schemed, they waited for the perfect moment to strike back. Martha's smile faded. "You think he'll try something else?" "I know he will." Caleb set Annie down gently. "He's lost face twice now. That kind of man would rather burn everything down than admit defeat." "Then what do we do?" Lydia asked. "We stay vigilant. We don't go anywhere alone. We keep the guns loaded and the doors locked." Caleb looked at each of them in turn. "And we wait for him to make his move." "That's no way to live," Martha protested. "It's the only way until this is finished." That night, after Martha had gone home and Annie was asleep, Lydia found Caleb outside, checking the perimeter of the property for the third time. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and joined him. "You can't stay awake forever," she said. "I can try." "Caleb. He's going to come, Lydia. Maybe not tonight or tomorrow, but soon. And when he does, I need to be ready." Lydia moved in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "We need to be ready. Not you alone. Us. Together. Remember." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I just got you. Both of you. I can't lose you now." "You won't. We're stronger than he is. We have something worth fighting for. Love, family, home. All Barrett has is pride and money. And pride makes men stupid." Despite everything, Caleb smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "When I had to be. When I had a daughter to protect and a future to fight for." Lydia rose on her toes and kissed him. "Come inside. Get some sleep. We'll take shifts watching if that makes you feel better, but you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." He resisted for another moment, then nodded. "All right, but at the first sign of trouble." "At the first sign of trouble, we handle it together." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and for the first time in days, Caleb actually slept. But Lydia's prediction proved correct. Barrett's pride did make him stupid. 2 nights later, Caleb woke to the smell of smoke. He was on his feet before his eyes fully opened, heart-pounding memories of the barn fire flooding back. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside in his bare feet. The chicken coop was ablaze, flames licking up the wooden sides and painting the night orange. The hens inside were screaming a horrible, panicked sound that tore at his chest. "Lydia!" he shouted. "Fire!" She was there in seconds, Annie in her arms. "Oh God!" "Take Annie and get water, as much as you can carry." Caleb was already running toward the coop. He threw open the gate and went inside, smoke immediately choking his lungs. The hens were in a panic, flying and squawking and trampling each other. He grabbed 2, 3, 4 birds and threw them outside. Went back in, eyes streaming, lungs burning. Got 3 more. The heat was becoming unbearable, the flames spreading faster than he could work. He made one more trip inside and grabbed the last 2 hens he could find. When he stumbled back out, Lydia was there with buckets of water from the well, throwing them desperately at the flames. It was too late. The structure was fully engulfed, and within minutes it collapsed in on itself with a crash of sparks and embers. Caleb sank to his knees, coughing violently. Lydia dropped beside him, her hands running over his face and arms checking for injuries. "Are you hurt? Caleb? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." His voice was ragged. "Got most of the birds out." Annie stood a few feet away, clutching the chickens she'd managed to catch in cage. "Rosie's gone," she whispered, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "I can't find Rosie." The red hen, the mean one she'd named that first week, gone in a fire that was definitely, absolutely arson. Caleb pushed to his feet, rage burning hotter than any fire. He stalked to where the flames had started, the northwest corner of the coop, away from any natural source of ignition, and found what he was looking for: a broken kerosene lantern. Deliberately placed, deliberately lit. Barrett's calling card. "That son of a bitch," Caleb growled. "He did this on purpose," Lydia said, her voice shaking with fury. "He snuck onto our property and set fire to our animals. He's trying to scare us, to make us feel unsafe in our own home." "Well, it's not going to work." Lydia's jaw set in that stubborn way Caleb had come to recognize. "We're not running, we're not backing down, and we're sure as hell not letting him get away with this." Caleb looked at her, this fierce, beautiful woman who'd been beaten down and terrorized but refused to stay down, and felt something fierce and protective surge through his chest. "No," he agreed. "We're not. It's time to end this, once and for all." And looking at the smoking ruins of what Barrett had destroyed, Caleb began to form a plan. The plan came together at dawn, while the smoking remains of the chicken coop still smoldered in the yard. Caleb sat at the kitchen table with Tom Henderson, Daniel Garrett, and 4 other ranchers who'd ridden over as soon as they saw the smoke. Coffee steamed in tin cups, but no one was drinking. They were too focused on what Caleb was saying. "Barrett's made his mistake," Caleb said quietly. "He came onto my property in the middle of the night and committed arson. That's a crime even Sheriff Dalton can't ignore if we present it right." "You have proof?" Garrett asked. Caleb placed the broken kerosene lantern on the table. "Found this at the point of origin. It's not mine, I mark all my equipment. And there are boot prints leading from the road to the coop and back. Fresh, made last night." Tom leaned forward. "So we take this to Dalton and demand he arrest Barrett." "Barrett will just claim someone else did it," Garrett said. "Maybe even suggest Caleb set his own fire for sympathy." "Then we don't go to Dalton," Caleb said. "We go over his head, straight to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne." The room went quiet. Going to Cheyenne meant escalating beyond the local corruption that Barrett controlled. It meant bringing in federal authority that even a man with Barrett's money couldn't buy off so easily. "That's a 3-day ride," one of the ranchers said. "Maybe 4 if the weather turns." "I'll make it in 2. Caleb's voice was hard with determination. "I'll leave within the hour." "You can't go alone," Tom protested. "If Barrett figures out what you're doing, then I'll have to be faster than him." Caleb looked around the table at the weathered faces of men who'd become his friends without him noticing. "I need you all to stay here. Protect Lydia and Annie while I'm gone. Barrett's getting desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. We'll take shifts, Tom said immediately. 2 men on the property at all times. Barrett won't get within 100 yards of this ranch. Lydia had been standing in the doorway listening to all of this, Annie pressed against her side. Now she stepped forward, her expression determined. I'm coming with you. Every head turned toward her. Lydia, Caleb started. Don't. She held up a hand. You're riding to Cheyenne to tell the marshal about a crime committed against our family. Our family, Caleb. I have just as much right to tell that story as you do. Maybe more since this whole nightmare started with Barrett trying to take my daughter. It's too dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. At least in Cheyenne we're away from Barrett's reach. Lydia's jaw set in that stubborn way that meant arguing was pointless. Annie can stay with Martha. She'll be safe there surrounded by Tom's family and whoever else you station here. But I'm going with you. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then at the other men around the table. Tom was hiding a smile behind his coffee cup. Garrett looked impressed. The other ranchers were nodding their approval. She's got a point, Tom said. The marshal's more likely to listen if he hears from both of you, especially the part about Barrett trying to kidnap a child. That'll turn any lawman's stomach. Caleb scrubbed a hand over his face. Fine, but we leave in 30 minutes and you do exactly what I say if we run into trouble. Deal. The next 30 minutes were a whirlwind of preparation. Lydia packed clothes and food while Caleb saddled the 2 strongest horses. Martha Henderson arrived to collect Annie, who clung to her mother with tears streaming down her face. I don't want you to go, Mama. I know, baby, but I have to. We're going to fix this so the bad man can never hurt us again. Lydia kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair and trying not to cry. Mrs. Henderson is going to take such good care of you, and when I come back, everything will be different. I promise. You promise. I promise. Lydia held her daughter at arm's length, memorizing her face. You be good. Mind Mrs. Henderson. And remember that Mr. Quiet and I love you very much. I love you too, Mama. Martha took Annie's hand gently. We'll be fine. You two just ride safe and come back soon. Then Caleb was there, helping Lydia onto her horse. She settled into the saddle, gripping the reins with hands that only trembled slightly. It had been years since she'd ridden, not since before Thomas died, but the muscle memory came back quickly. Caleb swung onto his own horse and looked back at Tom. You keep them safe. With my life, Tom said. Now go, and ride fast. They rode. The first day passed in a blur of motion and dust. Caleb set a punishing pace, stopping only to water the horses and let them rest for brief intervals. They spoke little, saving their energy for the road ahead. But Lydia felt the tension radiating from Caleb, the worry that Barrett would somehow discover their plan and intercept them, or worse, that something would happen to Annie while they were gone. By nightfall, they'd covered more ground than Lydia thought possible. Caleb found a sheltered spot near a creek hidden from the road by a stand of cottonwoods. They made a small fire and ate the bread and jerky Martha had packed. You holding up all right? Caleb asked, watching Lydia massage her aching thighs. I'll be sore tomorrow, but I'm fine. She tried to smile. Better than sitting at the ranch waiting for Barrett to make his next move. I should have ended this months ago. Should have confronted him directly instead of hoping he'd give up. Men like Barrett never give up. You know that. Lydia moved closer to the fire, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. But we're ending it now. That's what matters. Caleb poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. What if the marshal won't help? What if Barrett's reach extends even to Cheyenne? Then we find another way. We keep fighting until there's nothing left of him but smoke and ashes, just like that chicken coop. Lydia's voice was fierce. I'm done being afraid, Caleb. I'm done running. Whatever happens, we face it together. He looked at her across the dancing flames, and something passed between them, understanding determination and a love that had been forged in fire and hardship. Together. he agreed quietly. They took turns keeping watch through the night. When dawn broke cold and gray, they were already back on the horses pushing toward Cheyenne with renewed urgency. The second day was harder. The weather turned, bringing a cold rain that soaked through their clothes and made the road treacherous. The horses struggled through mud that sucked at their hooves. Lydia's entire body ached, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. They were too close to turn back now. By late afternoon, the buildings of Cheyenne appeared on the horizon. It was bigger than Dustridge, a real town with brick buildings and paved streets, and the kind of civilization that felt foreign after months on the ranch. They rode straight to the territorial marshal's office, muddy and exhausted, but determined. The marshal was a gray-haired man named Samuel Briggs, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He looked up from his desk when they entered, taking in their disheveled appearance, with a raised eyebrow. "Help you folks. My name is Caleb Rowan. This is Lydia Harrow. We need to file charges against Barrett Clay of Dustridge for arson, attempted kidnapping, extortion, and abuse of legal process." Briggs set down his pen. "That's quite a list. You have evidence." For the next hour, they told him everything. Caleb laid out the physical evidence, the lantern, the boot prints, witness statements from the ranchers. Lydia told her story from the beginning, Thomas's death, Barrett's fake contract, the marketplace incident, the siege at the ranch. She spoke clearly and calmly, refusing to let emotion derail her testimony, though her hands shook in her lap. When they finished, Briggs sat back in his chair and studied them both. "Barrett Clay is a wealthy man with powerful friends," he said finally. "Going after him means going after the people who protect him. You understand that?" "We understand," Caleb said. "We also understand that the law is supposed to protect everyone, not just the rich." "Ideally, yes." Briggs pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing. "I'll open an investigation. I'll need to interview witnesses, examine the evidence, and probably ride down to Dustridge myself to see the situation firsthand. That'll take time." "How much time?" Lydia asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "We don't have 3 weeks. Barrett's escalating. The chicken coop was just a warning. Next time it might be the house or the barn or—" Her voice broke. "Or worse." Briggs's expression softened slightly. "I understand your fear, Mrs. Harrow, but the law moves at its own pace. I can't arrest a man of Barrett Clay's standing without building an ironclad case first." "Then what are we supposed to do in the meantime?" Caleb demanded. "Just wait for him to kill us." "You stay smart and stay safe. Keep witnesses around. Document everything. And if he makes another move—" Briggs handed them a sealed letter. "Show him this. It's a formal notice that he's under investigation by territorial authority. Won't stop him if he's truly determined, but it might make him think twice." It wasn't the immediate solution they'd hoped for, but it was something. Caleb took the letter and tucked it carefully into his coat. "Thank you, Marshal." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when Barrett Clay's behind bars where he belongs." They found a boarding house for the night, a clean, modest place, run by a widow who took one look at Lydia's exhausted face and offered them her best room. Lydia collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, too tired to even remove her boots. Caleb pulled them off gently, then covered her with a quilt. "Rest. We've got a long ride back tomorrow." "Will it be enough?" Lydia asked, her eyes already closing. "The marshal's investigation." "It has to be." But he didn't sound convinced. They left at dawn and made even better time on the return journey, driven by worry about Annie and fear of what Barrett might have done in their absence. The horses were flagging by the time they reached the Henderson Ranch on the evening of the third day, but Caleb pushed them the final mile to his own property. Tom Henderson met them in the yard, rifle in hand, but he lowered it when he recognized them. "Thank God. We were starting to worry." "What happened?" Caleb dismounted quickly, helping Lydia down. "Is Annie—" "Annie's fine. Everyone's fine. But Barrett knows you went to Cheyenne." Tom's expression was grim. "He rode by yesterday with a dozen men. Didn't come onto the property. We had too many guns pointed at him, but he made it clear he knows what you're up to." Said you'd regret involving outside authority. Lydia's stomach churned. How did he find out? Got spies everywhere probably. Or maybe he just guessed. Tom glanced toward the house. Annie's inside with Martha. She's been asking for you constantly. Lydia didn't wait to hear more. She ran to the house and burst through the door, and there was Annie safe, whole, playing with a wooden horse Tom had carved for her. The little girl looked up, shrieked with joy, and launched herself into her mother's arms. Mama, you came back. Of course I came back, baby. I'll always come back. Lydia held her daughter so tightly, Annie squeaked in protest. Over her head, Lydia met Martha's eyes and saw the relief there. She was very brave, Martha said quietly. Asked about you every hour, but she didn't cry. Not once. That's my girl. Lydia kissed Annie's hair, her cheek, her forehead. I'm so proud of you. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his expression softening when he saw them together. But the moment of peace was short-lived. Tom followed him inside, and his next words shattered any sense of safety. Barrett left a message. Said you have until the end of the week to leave the territory. If you're still here by Sunday, he's coming back with enough men to burn everything to the ground. The room went cold. He can't do that, Martha protested. Not with the marshal investigating. He doesn't care about the marshal, Caleb said flatly. He's past caring about consequences. He just wants to win. Then we don't give him the chance. Lydia set Annie down gently and stood her jaw set with determination. We end this before Sunday. We bring the fight to him. Lydia. No, Caleb. No more waiting. No more reacting to what he does. We go to Dustridge tomorrow, all of us, and we tell the whole town exactly what Barrett Clay has done. We show them the marshal's letter. We force Barrett to back down in front of everyone, or we force him to reveal himself as the monster he really is. Tom was nodding slowly. She's right. Barrett's power comes from fear and secrecy. Strip those away and he's just a bully with a bank account. And if he doesn't back down, Caleb asked. If he calls our bluff. Then we stand our ground, Lydia said. Together, all of us. Because that's what families do. The plan took shape through the night. Tom rode out to gather the other ranchers, while Caleb cleaned weapons and checked ammunition. Lydia wrote out a detailed statement of Barrett's crime signing and dating it with a steady hand. By morning, 20 families had assembled at the ranch, more than had come before, more than Lydia had dared hope for. They rode into Dustridge like an army. The sun was high when they arrived, and the main street filled with horses and wagons as the procession came to a halt in front of the saloon. People emerged from shops and homes drawn by the spectacle. Lydia saw fear on some faces, curiosity on others, and on a few hope. Barrett was already there, standing on the saloon steps with his remaining men. His face was twisted with rage when he saw the size of the crowd. "What is this?" he demanded. Caleb dismounted and helped Lydia down. Together, they walked forward until they stood at the base of the steps, close enough to see the fury in Barrett's eyes, but far enough to react if he went for his gun. "This is the end, Barrett," Caleb said clearly. "We went to Cheyenne. We spoke to Territorial Marshal Briggs. You're under formal investigation for arson, extortion, attempted kidnapping, and corruption of local officials." He pulled out the sealed letter and held it up for everyone to see. The crowd murmured, and Lydia saw Sheriff Dalton's face go pale from where he stood near the general store. "You're lying," Barrett spat. "Read it yourself." Caleb tossed the letter at Barrett's feet. "It's all there. Every crime documented. Every witness statement recorded. The marshal will be here within 2 weeks to begin formal proceedings." Barrett snatched up the letter and tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents. As he read, the color drained from his face, then flooded back in an ugly red flush. "This means nothing. I have lawyers." "Your lawyers can't save you from federal charges," Daniel Garrett said, stepping forward from the crowd. "I've already filed the necessary paperwork. Even if you pay off Judge Thompson, the territorial court has jurisdiction now." Barrett looked around wildly, seeing the trap closing. His men were backing away, unwilling to go down with him. The townspeople were watching with naked interest, and Lydia could see the calculation happening behind their eyes. Barrett was finished, and they didn't have to be afraid anymore. "You think you've won?" Barrett's voice cracked. "You think this changes anything? I'll destroy you, Rowan. I'll take everything you have." "You already tried." Caleb's voice was steady. "You tried to take my family. You failed. Now you're going to face the consequences of your actions like a man instead of hiding behind money and corrupt officials. I'll see you dead first." Barrett's hand moved to his gun. Everything happened at once. Caleb's hand flew to his own weapon, but Lydia was faster. She pulled the pistol Caleb had given her from the pocket of her dress and fired. The shot went wide deliberately, but it made Barrett freeze. Every gun in the crowd suddenly pointed in his direction, a forest of barrels, all aimed at one man. "Don't!" Lydia said, her voice shaking, but her hand steady. "Don't give us a reason. Just surrender. Face justice. It's the only way this ends without more bloodshed." For a long, terrible moment, Barrett's hand stayed on his gun. Lydia could see him calculating the odds, weighing his pride against his survival. Then, slowly, he raised his hands. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward clearly, seeing which way the wind was blowing. "Barrett Clay, I'm placing you under arrest for arson and attempted murder. You have the right to—" "I know my rights," Barrett snarled, but he let Dalton cuff him without resistance, his eyes never leaving Caleb and Lydia. "This isn't over." "Yes," Lydia said clearly. "It is." And looking at Barrett's defeated face, at the crowd of townspeople who no longer cowered in fear at Caleb standing tall beside her, she finally believed it. The weeks that followed were a blur of testimony and legal proceedings. Marshal Briggs came to Dustridge as promised and conducted a thorough investigation. One by one, Barrett's crimes were laid bare for all to see. The fake contract that Lydia had supposedly signed was proven fraudulent, a document Barrett had forged after the fact to justify his attempted kidnapping. The arson charges stuck when 3 witnesses came forward to say they'd seen Barrett and his men riding toward Caleb's ranch the night of the fire. Even Sheriff Dalton, trying to save his own skin, testified about the pressure Barrett had put on him to look the other way. Barrett Clay was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. His property was seized to pay restitution to his victims. Pike and Vernon fled the territory rather than face charges of their own. And Dustridge slowly, tentatively began to breathe again without the weight of Barrett's tyranny pressing down on it. 1 month after Barrett's sentencing, Caleb and Lydia were married. It was a simple ceremony held at the ranch under the cottonwood tree by the creek, the same tree where Caleb had buried his first family years before. Tom Henderson officiated, reading from a worn Bible, while Martha dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Annie stood between them in a new dress, holding a basket of wildflowers, and beaming so brightly she seemed to glow. When Caleb slipped a simple gold band onto Lydia's finger, purchased with money from the sale of Barrett's seized property, his hands trembled slightly, but his voice was strong when he spoke his vows. "I promise to stand beside you through every storm, to protect you and Annie with everything I have, to build a life where you never have to be afraid again. I promise to love you not in place of what I lost, but because of what I found." Lydia's own vows were simpler. "I promise to be your partner, your equal, your family, to fight beside you when times are hard, and celebrate with you when times are good, to remind you every day that you deserve happiness because you gave us ours when we had nothing left. You may kiss your bride," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. And Caleb did gently, reverently, in front of God and neighbors and the daughter they would raise together. When they pulled apart, Annie threw her wildflowers in the air with a shriek of delight, and the assembled crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The years that followed were kind. The ranch prospered under Caleb's steady hand and Lydia's tireless work. They rebuilt the chicken coop, bigger this time with Annie's help. She named every hen with solemn dedication, though she saved the name Rosie for a particularly feisty red bird that reminded them all of the one they'd lost. 2 years after the wedding, Lydia gave birth to a son. They named him Thomas, after the man who'd loved her first, and Caleb held the baby with tears streaming down his face, and whispered promises to be the father this child deserved. Annie grew into a strong young woman who could ride and rope as well as any boy in the valley. She kept the wooden horse Tom had carved for her on a shelf in her room, along with the corn husk doll that had traveled with her through the darkest days. She never forgot where she'd come from, but she never let it define where she was going. Daniel Garrett became a regular visitor to the ranch, drawn initially by legal business, but eventually by Martha and Tom's eldest daughter, whom he courted with shy determination until she finally agreed to marry him. The wedding was the biggest celebration Dustridge had seen in years. And Caleb learned to smile again. Not the broken, guilty smile of a man who thought he didn't deserve joy, but the full, genuine smile of someone who'd found peace after years of grief. He still visited the graves on the hill, sometimes bringing wildflowers, and telling Sarah and Emma about the family he'd built, about the woman who'd reminded him that life could be good again. 30 years passed, like water flowing downstream, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always moving forward. The ranch became a landmark in the valley, a symbol of what happened when good people refused to give up. Children grew and had children of their own. The community that had stood together against Barrett's tyranny remained close bound by shared history and hard-won victory. One summer evening, when Caleb's hair had gone silver and Lydia's face showed the lines of a life well lived, they sat on the porch together, watching their grandchildren chase fireflies across the yard. Annie's daughter, bright-eyed and fearless, climbed the cottonwood tree by the creek while Thomas's sons splashed in the shallow water below. "We did all right," Caleb said, his weathered hand finding Lydia's and lacing their fingers together. "We did better than all right. We built something real, something that lasts. Because you wouldn't let me give up. Because we saved each other." Lydia leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and wood smoke, and home. "I came here with nothing. You gave me everything. You gave me more. You gave me a reason to keep living." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only comes after decades of knowing someone completely. Inside the house, music drifted from the old phonograph Thomas had bought them last Christmas. In the barn, horses nickered softly. And all around them, the ranch hummed with the quiet contentment of a life built on love and courage. The past was still there, the grief, the fear, the desperate fight for survival. But it no longer defined them. They'd taken their scars and turned them into strength, their losses into lessons about what truly mattered. As the sun dipped below the hills and the fireflies began their nightly dance, Caleb pulled Lydia closer and whispered the truth they'd learned all those years ago, in the dust of Dustridge Marketplace. Real heroism isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It's the quiet choice to stand up when everyone else looks away. It's the steady love that refuses to abandon those who need it most. It's the courage to fight not for glory or revenge, but for family, for home, for the simple right to live without fear. They'd found that courage together, and in finding it, they'd found each other. That was the real victory, not defeating Barrett Clay, but building a life so full of love and purpose that men like him became nothing more than cautionary tales told around campfires. The story that began with a mother's desperate cry and a stranger's quiet intervention had become something bigger than either of them could have imagined. It had become a legacy, a home, a family that would endure long after they were gone, carrying forward the lesson they'd learned in fire and dust and determination. Sometimes love whispers, sometimes justice moves slowly, but when courage meets compassion, when broken people choose to stand together instead of falling apart, miracles happen in the unlikeliest places. And that's a truth worth remembering.